Some people mistake authority for power. They're not the same thing. Authority can be given to anyone, a title, a promotion, a new corner office with a view. Power, real power, is something different. It's built quietly over years, through trust and reputation, and knowing exactly when to wait. Daniel had spent 14 years building that kind of power. His new manager was about to spend the next 8 months destroying his own. This is how it happened. Daniel worked as a senior logistics coordinator at a mid-sized distribution company in the Midwest. He'd been there since the company was running out of a single warehouse. He'd watched it grow to 11 facilities. He knew every process, every vendor, every shortcut that actually worked, and every one that didn't. Then corporate sent Marcus. Marcus arrived with what Daniel later described as the energy of someone who had just read a management book on the plane. He was 34, freshly promoted, and immediately made it clear that things were going to change. In his first week, Marcus held a company-wide meeting. He stood at the front of the conference room and placed a copy of the employee handbook on every chair. "This," he said, "is now the law." He meant it. Over the following weeks, Marcus enforced the handbook with an almost religious dedication. Employees were written up for arriving 1 minute late. Lunch breaks were timed. Personal items on desks were subject to a new professional appearance policy. A 15-year employee was formally reprimanded for keeping a small family photo outside the approved display zone. The staff was miserable. Several people started looking for other jobs. Daniel watched all of this without saying much. He wasn't naive. He'd seen difficult managers come and go. What made Marcus different was the particular pleasure he seemed to take in the rules. Not in outcomes, not in efficiency, in the rules themselves, as though enforcing them proved something about him. That observation, Daniel would later say, was the key to everything. 3 months in, Marcus turned his attention to Daniel directly. It started with a performance review. Marcus rated Daniel as meets expectations, a significant downgrade from the exceeds expectations rating Daniel had received every year for the previous decade. When Daniel asked for specifics, Marcus cited his resistance to the new management culture. Then came the write-ups. In the span of 6 weeks, Marcus issued Daniel 4 formal disciplinary notices. Each one cited the employee handbook. Each one was for something minor, a report submitted in a slightly non-standard format, a vendor call logged in the wrong system field, a meeting attended 2 minutes late due to a prior meeting running long. Daniel accepted each write-up quietly, asked for a copy, and filed them in a folder at home. He also did something else, something Marcus would not find out about for several months. He read the employee handbook. All of it. Every page, every policy, every clause and subclause and footnote. And what he found changed everything. The employee handbook, it turned out, was not just a list of obligations for employees. It was also a list of obligations for management. Specifically, Daniel found 5 policies that Marcus had been systematically violating since his arrival. The first, the handbook required that all performance reviews cite specific documented incidents, not general observations. Marcus's reviews contained phrases like attitude concerns and cultural fit issues, language with no supporting documentation. The second, the company's progressive discipline policy required that informal counseling occur before formal write-ups with a documented record of each step. Marcus had skipped directly to written warnings every time. The third, the handbook contained an anti-retaliation clause. Any disciplinary action taken within 90 days of an employee raising a concern with HR was presumed retaliatory, unless the company could prove otherwise. Daniel had raised a concern with HR in month 2, quietly, about the desk photo policy, and the write-ups had begun 30 days later. The fourth, managers were required to maintain written documentation of all verbal performance conversations within 48 hours. Marcus had never provided any such documentation to Daniel, or, it turned out, to anyone else. The fifth, and this was the one that mattered most, the handbook contained an explicit conflict of interest disclosure policy. Any manager with a personal or financial relationship with a vendor was required to disclose it in writing before that vendor could be considered for contracts. Daniel started making some calls. What Daniel discovered through a combination of industry contacts and public business records was that Marcus had a pre-existing relationship with a new freight vendor he'd been pushing to bring on board since month 1. The vendor was owned by his brother-in-law. No disclosure had been filed. Daniel didn't go to HR, not yet. He went to his union representative first. The company had a small but functional union for senior logistics staff, and presented everything: the write-ups, the handbook violations, the missing documentation, the conflict of interest, and the timeline connecting the retaliation. The union rep reviewed the materials for 3 days. Then she made a single phone call to corporate HR. Not the local office, but the regional compliance team, 2 levels above Marcus. She didn't accuse Marcus of anything. She simply asked, on behalf of her member, whether the company's handbook policies were being uniformly applied, and whether the company was aware of its exposure under the anti-retaliation clause. Corporate HR opened an investigation the same week. The investigation took 6 weeks. Investigators spoke to 14 current and former employees. They reviewed Marcus's disciplinary records going back to the beginning of his tenure. They audited the vendor selection process for the freight contract. Marcus was placed on administrative leave in week 4. He never came back. The company declined to publicly state the reasons for his departure, but the freight vendor contract was cancelled. The write-ups issued to Daniel were expunged from his record. He received a formal apology from regional HR and a retroactive exceeds expectations rating for the review year. 6 months later, Daniel was promoted to Regional Operations Director, a role that, functionally, included oversight of the position Marcus had once occupied. He kept the handbook. He still has it. The thing about rules is that they're only as fair as the person enforcing them. Marcus believed the handbook was a tool of control, something to be wielded against people with less power. What he never understood was that it was also a contract, one the company had made with every single employee who'd ever signed it. Daniel didn't break any rules. He didn't raise his voice or make threats or burn anything down. He simply read what everyone had already agreed to, and held the people in power to the same standard they'd been holding him. That's not revenge. That's the job. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Corporate Karma. New cases drop Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you've ever had a manager like Marcus, leave a comment. You're not alone.